A pie, a porch, a little girl with a cloth doll pressed against her chest and eyes that had already learned not to ask for too much. A man who had forgotten, somewhere between one winter and the next, that generosity could still surprise him, including his own. These are the things that mattered, not the drought that had emptied half the county, not the gossip that ran through Harlan's Crossing like water finds a crack, not the particular arrangement of pride and loneliness that had settled over Cale Booker like a coat he'd stopped noticing he was wearing. What mattered was a small hand extended across a counter, offering the only thing she had, and what happened in the breath after that. I have told a great many stories in my time, stories about courage on horseback, and fortunes made and lost, and rivers crossed in the dark. But the ones that stay with me, the ones I find myself returning to when the night is quiet and I need reminding that the world is fundamentally decent, are the small ones. The ones where everything turns on a single sentence, where the whole direction of two lives pivots on a moment no wider than a heartbeat. This is one of those stories, and it begins, as so many of the true ones do, not with anything dramatic, but with bread. Cale Booker had been running the general store in Harlan's Crossing for 11 years by the autumn of 1887, and in those 11 years he had become, by general agreement, the most reliably decent man in the county. This was meant as a compliment. It was also, if you listened carefully to the way people said it, a kind of epitaph. Reliably decent, solid, dependable. Words that described a fence post as much as a man. He rose at 5, opened the store at 6:30, kept his accounts in a hand so neat it looked typeset, extended credit to families who needed it without making them feel the weight of the favor, and closed at 7 in the evening. He ate his supper alone. He read for an hour by lamplight. He slept. He did not complain. He did not, as far as anyone could observe, want. That was the thing about Cale that the town had collectively decided to stop examining too closely, the wanting, or the absence of it. He had been married once. Her name was Ruth. She had died of fever in the spring of 1881, 6 years before this story begins, and she had taken with her a version of Cale Booker that was looser and more laughing and more apt to leave the accounts until tomorrow because something more interesting had come up. What remained was the reliably decent version. The town had made its peace with this. Cale, for his part, had made a different kind of peace, the kind where you tell yourself the quiet is what you wanted all along, and you say it often enough that it starts to feel like the truth. He was 41 years old. He had a good store, a clean house, a dog named Patterson who regarded him with the steady and mildly judgmental affection of a creature who understood more than he let on. He had, he told himself, everything that was reasonable to expect. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. Patterson knew, but Patterson was a dog, and his methods of communication were limited to meaningful stares and the strategic placement of himself in doorways, which Cale had learned to navigate around rather than interpret. The autumn of 1887 had been hard on the county in the particular way that droughts are hard, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the way a low fire burns through a floor from underneath, invisible until the boards give way. The summer had been dry, the harvest thin, and by October the lines of worry on the faces of the farming families who came into Booker's general store had deepened from seasonal concern into something quieter and more serious. Cale had extended credit to the Murphys, the Hennessy family, old Gertrude Albright, who was too proud to ask but whose hands shook when she counted coins. He did this without ceremony, recording the debts in his ledger with the same neat hand he used for everything, because that was how you helped people without making them feel helped. He had learned that from Ruth, who had learned it from her mother, and he thought of her every time he did it, which was the closest thing to a conversation they still had. It was on a Thursday morning in the second week of October that the bell above the store door rang at 9:15, and Cale looked up from the bolt of brown wool he was measuring to find a small girl standing just inside the entrance, holding a cloth doll by one arm, and looking at him with the kind of careful, assessing look that children give adults when they are trying to determine whether the adult is safe. She was perhaps 7 years old, perhaps 8. She was wearing a coat that had been let out at the sleeves and hemmed up at the bottom, and then let out again, the adjustments visible in the fabric like a record of how much she had grown, and how long the coat had been expected to keep growing with her. Her hair was dark and braided with considerable precision, which told him that someone who loved her had braided it that morning, and braided it carefully, which told him something about the mother he hadn't met yet. The girl looked at the bread loaves on the counter. Cale sold 3 kinds, baked by Mrs. Fenwick 2 streets over, and then she looked at him, and then she looked at the doll in her hand, and then she set her jaw in the way that people set their jaws when they have decided to do something hard. She walked to the counter. She set the doll on the wooden surface between them. She said, in a voice that was working very hard to be steady, that she would like 1 loaf of bread, please, and she was offering her doll as payment because she didn't have any coins, but the doll was a good doll and had all its buttons. Cale Booker looked at the doll. It was indeed a good doll. It had a sewn face with embroidered eyes and a dress made from what looked like flour sacking. And it had, as advertised, all its buttons, 4 of them, small and brown, running down the front of the little dress. Someone had made this doll with patience and care. Someone had loved making it. He looked at the girl. She was looking back at him with an expression that was trying to be businesslike and not entirely succeeding, because underneath the businesslike expression was the face of a child who had been sent on a hard errand and was determined to complete it with dignity. He thought about a great many things in the space of a few seconds, which is one of the things that happens when you have spent 11 years being reliably decent. You get faster at the calculations that matter. He reached under the counter. He picked up the doll and he handed it back to her. He said, "Keep both and bring your mama to supper." The girl stared at him. He put a loaf of bread into a cloth sack and set it on the counter beside her free hand. She looked at the bread. She looked at the doll. She looked at him. She said, very quietly, that her mama would say they couldn't accept charity. Cale said it wasn't charity. He said he had been meaning to have company for supper for some time and hadn't gotten around to arranging it. And if her mama came and cooked something, he had flour and potatoes and he believed there was a ham, then it would be a fair trade and nobody would owe anybody anything. The girl considered this with the seriousness it deserved. She picked up the bread. She tucked the doll back under her arm. She said her name was Nora and her mama's name was Clara Voss, and they lived in the Alderman place on the East Road. Then she walked out of the store with the careful dignity of someone who has completed a difficult negotiation and intends to report back accurately. Patterson, who had been sitting behind the counter observing all of this, looked up at Cale with an expression that could only be described as pointed. Cale told him to mind his own business. Patterson put his chin back on his paws. He did not look convinced. Clara Voss arrived at Cale Booker's store the following morning. And she arrived, Cale would later think, the way weather arrives. You could see it coming from a distance, and by the time it reached you, it was already doing something to the air. She was 34 years old, though he didn't know that yet. She was the widow of Thomas Voss, who had brought her out from Ohio 2 years ago with a plan for farming and a talent for optimism that had, unfortunately, not translated into a talent for rain. Thomas had died in the spring, a riding accident, sudden and senseless, and Clara had stayed because she had nowhere else to go, and because she was not, by nature, a person who went backward. She was dark-haired like her daughter, with the same quality of careful assessment in her eyes, and she walked into Booker's general store with Nora at her side, and a manner that was simultaneously gracious and absolutely not to be trifled with. She thanked him for the bread. She said it was very kind. She said Nora had told her about his offer of supper and that she wanted to be clear that she was not in the habit of accepting charity, but that she had thought about his framing of the arrangement and found it, on reflection, to be a reasonable one, and that if he still wanted company for supper, she could cook a meal that would be worth the provisions, and she would like to be paid in provisions, rather than coin, because she had enough pride not to take something for nothing, but not so much pride that she would let Nora go hungry on account of it. This was said plainly and without apology. Cale, who had spent 11 years in a store and had heard a great many things said in a great many ways, found himself listening to the end of this speech with a quality of attention he hadn't exercised in some time. He said that sounded entirely fair. She said, "Good," and named a day. He agreed to the day. She left. He stood at the counter for a moment after the bell had stopped ringing, and Patterson looked up at him from the floor, and Cale said, out loud to no one in particular, that she was very direct. Patterson wagged once. Cale went back to his accounts. He did not, he told himself, think about it further. This was not true, but he was not ready to examine that yet, and the accounts were genuinely in need of attention, so he let himself believe it for the time being. The supper was on a Friday. Clara Voss arrived with Nora and a jar of preserved plums she had put up in August, which she placed on Cale's kitchen table with the air of someone ensuring that the exchange was balanced before it began. She moved through his kitchen with the efficient competence of a woman who had been cooking on uncertain resources for long enough that she could make something good out of nearly anything. And she made something very good out of the flour and the potatoes and the ham, and also out of the preserved plums, which she turned into a sauce that Cale would think about at odd moments for the rest of the week. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, and Nora talked about the dog. Patterson had positioned himself under the table with the strategic patience of an animal who understood the geometry of dropped food, and Clara talked about the farm, practically and without self-pity, describing what had gone wrong and what she was trying to do about it in the same tone she might use to describe a problem with a fence. Cale listened. He asked questions. She answered them. The meal lasted 2 hours, which was an hour and 45 minutes longer than Cale's meals usually lasted. And when Clara and Nora had gone, he washed the dishes and then stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular. Patterson sat beside him. The kitchen felt different in a way that was difficult to name. Not larger, not smaller, just different. The way a room feels when it has been used for its actual purpose after a long time of being used for something less. He did not name what he was feeling. He filed it away without examining it, in the particular manner of a man who has learned to be careful with things that could cost him. But he filed it somewhere he could find it again. That, if you were paying attention, and Patterson was always paying attention, was the beginning. Now, I want to pause here for just a moment, because we are standing at the edge of something, and I think you should know it. I don't know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're settled in at home. Maybe you're on a long drive somewhere. Maybe the night is cold outside your window and this story is the warm thing in the room. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. If this story is sitting well with you, if it's the kind of thing you'd want to find again, I hope you'll let me know. A like, a comment, a word about where you're listening from. It means more than you might think, because Cale Booker is about to figure something out. It's going to take him a while. That's all right. The best realizations usually do. The suppers became a standing arrangement, though neither Cale nor Clara ever formally declared them so. It happened the way most true arrangements happen, gradually, and then as if it had always been true. The first supper led to a second, proposed by Clara on the grounds that she still owed him for the provisions, and the second led to a third because Nora had asked, with the uncomplicated directness of a child who sees no reason why a good thing should stop, whether they were coming back next Friday, and neither adult had been able to produce a reasonable argument against it. By November, they were coming every Friday without discussion, and sometimes on a Wednesday as well. And Cale had begun keeping certain provisions, specifically because he knew Clara would find a use for them. He told himself this was practical. It was practical. It was also something else, but he was not looking at the something else directly yet. The way you don't look directly at a bright thing because you're not sure you're ready for what you'll see. Clara, for her part, was not a woman who deceived herself about her own feelings, but she was a woman who had learned to be careful about acting on them, because she had a daughter to think about, and a farm to keep, and the particular vulnerability of a widow in a small town who could not afford to make a mistake that the town would remember longer than she would. So she came to supper, and she cooked, and she talked to Cale in the plain and practical way that was her natural register, and she noticed things about him that she did not say aloud. She noticed that he refilled Nora's cup before his own. She noticed that he had moved a low shelf so Nora could reach the jar of penny candy he kept near the register, and had not mentioned doing it. She noticed that he listened, really listened, not the polite half-listening of a man waiting for his turn to speak, but the full attention listening of someone who is genuinely interested in what you are saying, and has been, she suspected, hungry for conversation for a long time. She noticed all of this, and she filed it away in her own careful manner, and she waited, because she was, at her core, a patient woman, and because some things cannot be rushed without being broken. The town naturally noticed. Harlan's Crossing was a town of approximately 400 people, which meant it was a town of approximately 400 opinions about everyone else's business, and the weekly appearances of Clara Voss at Booker's General Store, and the less observable but somehow thoroughly observed Friday suppers generated a quantity of commentary proportional to the general lack of other entertainment. The commentary was not unkind, for the most part, because the town was not unkind, for the most part. It was simply interested. Mabel Pruitt, who ran the dry goods counter at the other end of Main Street and had appointed herself the town's primary information exchange, said that it was about time Cale Booker had some company. and that Clara Voss seemed like a sensible woman, and that she hoped something would come of it. Doc Hargrove said he'd believe it when he saw it, because Cale Booker had been alone for 6 years, and a man that settled in his solitude didn't unsettle easily. Reverend Marsh said he thought it was a fine thing, and that he'd be glad to perform a service whenever it came to that, which was premature enough that even Mabel Pruitt told him to slow down. And then there was Edmund Farley. Edmund Farley was 38, prosperous, widowed 2 years ago, and had made it quietly known through the channels by which such things are made known in small towns, that he considered Clara Voss to be an admirable woman, and that he would be glad to help her with the farm, and with Nora's upbringing, and with any number of other things, if she were amenable. He was decent about it. He was patient about it. He brought firewood in November without being asked, and left it stacked by the door without making a production of it. And he was kind to Nora in the unforced way of a man who genuinely liked children. He was, in other words, the right answer to the wrong question, and the town approved of him considerably, and several people said as much to Clara, who thanked them and said she would keep it in mind, which was the most gracious possible way of saying nothing at all. Cale heard about Edmund Farley in the way you hear about things in small towns, which is to say he heard about it from 3 different people in the space of 2 days, each of whom framed it as casual information, and each of whom was watching him carefully when they said it. He received this information with the equanimity of a man who had decided it had nothing to do with him. He told himself that Clara Voss was a grown woman who could make her own decisions, which was true. He told himself that he had no claim on her, which was also true. He told himself that Edmund Farley was a fine man and a sensible choice, which was true as well, and which was the thing that sat in his chest like a stone he kept trying to forget was there. He went home on the Thursday evening after hearing about Farley for the 3rd time, and he sat in his kitchen with Patterson, and he did not read, and he did not do the accounts, and he did not, for once, find the quiet particularly restful. Patterson put his head in Cale's lap. Cale put his hand on Patterson's head. He sat there for a long time. He thought about Ruth. He thought about the way Ruth had laughed, which was sudden and whole, the kind of laugh that committed completely. He thought about what she had said to him once, in the last winter before she got sick, when he had been dragging his feet about something he couldn't now remember, some decision, some step he'd been reluctant to take, and she had looked at him with the particular fond impatience she reserved for his slowest moments and said, "Cale, you are a thorough man, and I love you for it, but sometimes thorough is just another word for scared, and you ought to know the difference." He thought about that for a long time. He thought about the bread, and the doll with all its buttons, and the jar of preserved plums, and the way Clara's hands moved when she cooked, efficient and sure, and the way she had said, "I found it to be a reasonable arrangement," on reflection, as if she had genuinely considered it and decided it was worth her dignity. He thought about Nora asking if they were coming back next Friday. He thought about the low shelf he had moved without mentioning it. He thought about 6 years of supper alone. He thought about all of this in the way he thought about everything. Slowly, thoroughly, and somewhere around midnight he arrived at a conclusion that had probably been available to him for several weeks, which was that he was in love with Clara Voss, and that he was afraid, and that Ruth had told him he ought to know the difference. He did not act on this conclusion immediately. He was a thorough man. He spent a week examining the conclusion from multiple angles, the way you check a structure before you trust your weight to it. He asked himself whether he was being foolish, a 41-year-old man, set in his ways, a store and a dog and a quiet house, and whether Clara could possibly want what he had to offer, which did not seem, from the outside, like very much. He asked himself whether Nora deserved a more prosperous situation, a man with land and livestock and the kind of established stability that Edmund Farley represented. He asked himself whether 6 years of managed solitude had made him unfit for the kind of close daily life that marriage required. He asked himself all of these questions with great thoroughness and considerable honesty, and the answers were not uniformly encouraging, and he filed them all and sat with them and kept the store and extended credit to the Hennessy family, and measured out flour and nails and brown wool, and did not say anything to anyone, because that was how he processed things. And Patterson watched him do all of this with the steady gaze of a dog who has already arrived at the answer and is simply waiting for the human to catch up. It was on a Friday in the 2nd week of December, with the first real snow of the season coming down outside the store windows, and the fire in the corner stove doing its best against the cold. that Clara came in for provisions, and Nora went immediately to the low shelf with the penny candy. And Cale was measuring out coffee, and Clara was telling him about a repair the farmhouse roof needed. And she said, in the middle of a sentence about shingles, that Edmund Farley had offered to send his man over to fix it, and she had thanked him and said she'd manage. And she said it in the tone of someone making a factual report, and not in the tone of someone inviting comment. Cale measured the coffee. He said, without looking up, that was kind of Farley. Clara said yes, it was. There was a pause. Cale said, still measuring, that he could fix the roof. He said he was handy enough, and it wasn't a large job, and he could come on a Sunday. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you don't have to. Cale looked up. He said, I know. There was another pause, and something moved through it that was not quite a question, and not quite an answer, but was in the neighborhood of both. And then Nora appeared at Clara's elbow with a peppermint stick, and the moment closed over like water, and they talked about shingles again. But Cale noticed that Clara had not said no. And Clara noticed that Cale had not looked away when he said, I know. And Patterson, from his position under the counter, noted all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a dog whose patience is finally being rewarded. He fixed the roof on a Sunday in mid-December, and it was cold work. And Clara brought him coffee twice without being asked. And when he came down, she had made a meal from what she had in the house, which was not much, and it was one of the best meals he had eaten in years. And they sat at her kitchen table while Nora showed him a picture she had drawn of Patterson, which was extremely accurate about the expression and less accurate about the proportions. And Cale said it was a very fine portrait, and Nora said she was going to make one of him next. And Clara caught his eye across the table, and they were both, for a moment, smiling. The real smiles, the full ones, the kind that happen before you can decide whether to allow them. He drove home in the dark with the cold air on his face and the sense of something loosening in his chest that had been tightly wound for a long time. And he thought about what Ruth had said, and he thought about the difference between thorough and scared. And he thought that he had been, for the better part of 6 years, confusing one for the other. He went home. He sat down. He got out a piece of paper, and he wrote out what he wanted to say. Not because he intended to read from it, but because writing things out was how he made sure he had them straight. He wrote for a while. He read what he had written. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He told Patterson he was going to do something the day after tomorrow, and Patterson thumped his tail once on the floor, which Cale chose to interpret as encouragement. He went to the Alderman place on a Tuesday morning, which was not a Friday, which was itself a kind of statement. Clara answered the door with flour on her hands and the look of someone who had been in the middle of something and was not entirely surprised to be interrupted. Nora was at school. The house was quiet. Cale stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, literally, his hat in his hands, because he had taken it off without thinking about it. And he said that he had something he wanted to say and he would like to say it plainly, and he hoped she would hear it in the spirit it was meant. Clara said she would. He said, I have been operating under a set of assumptions that I believe need revision. He said he had assumed for some years that a certain kind of life was behind him, and that the quiet he had made for himself was sufficient, and that it would be asking too much of the world to expect otherwise. He said he had recently come to think that these assumptions were mistaken. He said he thought she was a remarkable woman, remarkable in the particular sense of being worth remarking on, worth paying attention to, worth the considerable risk of saying so out loud. He said he was aware that he was 41 years old and set in habits that a more reasonable person might find trying, and that he had a store and a dog and a house that was clean but not large, and that he was not Edmund Farley, and that he was not going to pretend to be. He said he would like, if she were willing, to be considered. Not decided upon, considered. He said he thought he could make her life easier in practical terms, and he hoped he could make it better in other terms, and he was prepared to be thorough about both. He stopped. He had said what he came to say. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, and the December cold around him, and he waited, which was the hardest part, because he was not naturally a waiter, and the waiting felt like standing at the edge of something very high. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She had flour on her hands. The morning was very still. Then she said, Cale Booker, I have been waiting for you to say something like that since the second Friday in October. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without decoration, as if it were simply the true thing and therefore the obvious thing to say. She said she had thought about Edmund Farley and found him to be a decent man and entirely the wrong answer. She said she had thought about the low shelf he had moved without mentioning it, and the way he listened, and the fact that he had said, "I know," when she said, "You don't have to." And she said that those things had told her what she needed to know, long before he had gotten around to saying it out loud. She said she would be glad to be considered, and that she suspected the consideration would not take very long. Then she said, "Come inside, it's cold," and he did. The town of Harlan's Crossing took the news with the particular mixture of satisfaction and mild indignation that small towns reserve for outcomes they predicted but were not consulted about. Mabel Pruitt said she had known it from the beginning, which was true. Doc Hargrove said he'd believe it when he saw the ring, and then he saw the ring, and he said, "Well, good," and bought them a wedding present of considerable generosity. Reverend Marsh, who had been told to slow down in November, said he had been patient and he was glad his patience had been rewarded, and he performed the ceremony in January with evident personal satisfaction. Edmund Farley came to the wedding and shook Cale's hand with the grace of a man who knows he was the wrong answer and has made his peace with it. And Clara thanked him for the firewood and meant it, and he said he hoped they would be very happy, and he meant that too. Nora wore a dress that Clara had made from blue wool, and she carried the cloth doll with all its buttons. And at the reception she told anyone who would listen that the whole thing had started because of her, which was not entirely inaccurate. Patterson attended the ceremony by virtue of following Cale to the church and being too dignified to be turned away, and he sat at the end of the pew with an expression of profound vindication that several people remarked upon. The winter passed, the spring came. Clara's farm, their farm, now, though it took Cale some time to say the word "R" without a small, surprised pause, began to recover as the drought broke and the season turned generous. Nora grew. She outgrew the coat with the adjusted hem and got a new one, and Clara let out the hem on the old one and passed it to the youngest Hennessy girl, which was the kind of thing Clara did without mentioning it, and which was one of the things Cale had come to love about her. The way she moved through the world quietly, making things better, and not keeping a ledger of it. They had a son in 1889, whom they named Thomas after Clara's first husband, because Clara was not a woman who erased things, and Cale was not a man who needed her to. They had a daughter in 1891, whom they named Ruth, and when Clara told him what she wanted to name her, Cale was quiet for a moment, and then he said that was exactly right, and it was, and he thought that Ruth, the first Ruth, the laughing one, would have found all of this extremely satisfying, and would have said so with considerable directness. Years later, when Nora was grown and had children of her own, she would tell the story of the bread and the doll, and she would always end it the same way. She would say that she had walked into that store with the only thing she had, and walked out with more than she'd gone in for, and that this had turned out to be the pattern of her whole childhood. And she thought it was because of the particular kind of man Cale Booker was, the kind who sees what a person actually needs and finds a way to provide it that doesn't cost them their dignity. And sometimes, when she told the story, someone would ask her what he had said, exactly, when she put the doll on the counter, and she would say, "He said keep both and bring your mama to supper." And she would smile the smile that was her mother's smile, the real one, the full one, and she would say that she had always thought those were the most important words she had ever heard, because they had turned out to be the beginning of everything. Now, here is what I want to say to you before we part. Cale Booker's error was not that he grieved. Grief is not an error. Grief is the honest accounting of what mattered. His error was that he looked at his grief and his age and his quiet life, and he added them up and arrived at a number that he decided was his final sum, as if a person were an arithmetic problem with a fixed answer, as if the equation were closed. He was measuring himself in the wrong units. He was counting losses when he should have been counting capacity. He thought the question was whether he deserved another chance at happiness, and he had answered it no, very thoroughly, with all the care he brought to everything, and he had been wrong in the most complete and well-intentioned way a person can be wrong. Here is the thing about Cale Booker that he could not see from inside his own life. The very qualities he thought disqualified him, his deliberateness, his thoroughness, his habit of attending to things without making a production of it, were precisely the qualities that made him worth waiting for. Clara Voss, who was a perceptive woman, had seen this in the second week of October. Nora had seen it the moment he handed back the doll. Patterson had seen it, in all likelihood, before any of them. The only person who couldn't see it was Cale, because he was using the wrong measure. He was measuring what he had lost instead of what he had become. I have told a lot of stories in my time. And this is the one I come back to when I think about the particular human habit of closing accounts that are still open. We do this. We look at a chapter of our lives that ended in pain and we decide it was the last chapter because it hurt enough to feel final. We add up our years and our losses and our settled habits and we arrive at a number and we say, "This is what I am now. This is the sum of me." And we mistake the subtraction for the total. Don't let the arithmetic stop you. Don't let the careful accounting of what you have lost convince you that the ledger is closed. Because sometimes a small hand sets something on a counter in front of you. And the question it is asking is not whether you have enough to give. It is whether you are willing to give what you have and trust that it will be enough. And sometimes the right answer is the simplest one. Keep both and bring your mama to supper. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Wherever you are, in a warm room, on a long road, at the end of a hard day, I am grateful you were here. I hope this story sat well with you, and I hope you carry some small piece of it forward into whatever comes next. Be generous, be patient, know the difference between thorough and scared. And if someone sets the only thing they have on the counter in front of you, give it back to them. Give it back, and give them more besides. Until next time, keep both.